Good morning. Get my hands all ready. Just waiting for some people to pop on. We're gonna make some bread. It is cloudy today, but I think it's warm out, so that's good. That's good. Good morning, good morning. Happy Wednesday. Week, I have no idea what it is since we've been in self-isolation. And we're still baking, which is great. Okay, so if you guys are all ready, let's get going. Morning, Sandra. Hi, Linda. Nice to see you guys. Thanks for joining me. Okay, so the recipe that we're doing today is your basic kind of sandwich bread loaf that you're going to do in your loaf pan, okay? Because I know a ton of you guys got a loaf pan when I did my stoneware sale, and so everybody's now got it, and I thought it would be perfect time to do a sandwich bread. So I've made this a couple of times. I find it's a really easy recipe to use. So I did post the recipe a little earlier this morning, so you can check that out. But all the ingredients are pretty straightforward. So we're gonna get started. Got my mixing bowl, and we're gonna start with our flour. So this recipe calls for just a regular all-purpose, and we're gonna do 3 cups. So if you haven't watched my recipes before, measuring flour is really, really important when you're bread making. A lot of times, like if you look at the recipe that we're using today, they actually give the measurements and they also give the weights. So if you want the most accurate measure, then weigh it. If you kind of want to be close, then you can measure it. But when you come down to baking is a real science. So that's why it's so important that you kind of can't just throw things in, and you need to be really, really accurate with it. So how I like to measure my flour, you guys who have been on my tutorials before, you know this, but in case you haven't, I want to share it with you. What you're going to do is basically loosen up your flour. I just take a knife, loosen it so it's not compacted, put your measuring cup in and bring it up like this so it's all uneven. Take the back of your knife, so the flat part, and just level it across like that. And there's your 1 cup. Because the thing is you don't want this compact, right? Because if you compact your flour, then you're gonna end up with more flour than what you need, and it's gonna throw your recipe off. So we're doing 3 cups. And I did good this morning. I actually talked and measured at the same time. Normally I have trouble counting. Okay, those of you who have been on before know that. Okay, so we have 3 cups of our flour all in. Next thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna do our water and our milk. So it calls for 1/2 cup of hot water and 1/2 cup of milk. So you guys know that when you're using yeast, yeast needs to activate with basically lukewarm water. So one of the tips with this recipe is if you take hot water from the tap and cold milk from your fridge and you mix them, you end up with your lukewarm water. So I'm just gonna get my hot water. Okay, so I have my 1/2 cup of hot water. I'm gonna take my milk. I'm gonna do 1/2 cup of milk. And you can use skim milk, 1%, whole milk, whatever you got in the kitchen works, okay? Give it a little mix, like that. And if you put your finger in, it should be lukewarm, okay? And mine isn't. So my water from my tap wasn't hot enough. Oopsie. So I'm just gonna pop this in the microwave. So So that should warm it up. So that's why it's really, really important that you check the temperature, because if I had put that in with my yeast, more than likely my yeast wouldn't have been activated because my liquid would have been too cold. Okay. Morning, guys. Sorry, I'm just reading the comments. That's really funny. Okay, that's so much better. So now my milk water mixture is lukewarm. Okay, it was only 15 seconds in the microwave. So if you find when you test it, it's not warm enough, like think of it like a temp and temperature. You don't want it hot. If it's hot, you're going to, it's going to kill your yeast. And if it's cold, it's not going to activate your yeast. So that's why it's kind of like a happy medium, kind of around 100 or a little bit less. Okay, so we're going to add that in. And next thing we're going to do is we're going to do 4 tablespoons melted butter. You can also use a 1/4 cup of vegetable oil if you like. There we go. It's early. Everything's falling. Okay, next thing is 2 tablespoons of sugar. Okay, and again, make sure they're nice and level. That's why these measuring spoons are so great, because you can adjust them, right? You can adjust it to whatever measurement you need. The big one goes from a teaspoon to a tablespoon with all your measurements in between. And then the little one that comes with it goes from 1/8 of a teaspoon to a teaspoon, which is what we're going to use for the salt and the yeast. Okay, so 2 tablespoons of sugar is in. We're doing 1 1/4 teaspoons of salt. 1 1/4. There we go. And lastly, we are doing 2 teaspoons of yeast. So I know when everything started with the pandemic, flour and yeast were like the hot commodity, like toilet paper. So quick rise yeast or instant yeast is what we're using today. Some people might have dry active yeast and it looks like little balls. Okay, so the difference is, if you can see this, if you don't use yeast, that is an instant yeast. It's really, really tiny, tiny granules. And what that means is because it's instant, I don't have to proof it in my liquid ahead of time. If you are using a dry active yeast, so the ones that look like little balls, you need to proof it. So what you would do is you would actually take your yeast and you would put it into your lukewarm water milk mixture and you would let it sit for about 5 minutes. And what's going to happen is it's going to get all nice and poofy and foamy. And then you're going to add the rest of your ingredients because you've activated the yeast. With the instant stuff, you don't need to do that. You can just put everything all in together. Okay. And if you ever are finding, take your spatula and you're going to mix. So I'm just going to talk while I do this. If you ever find that when you're making your breads aren't rising, then more than likely it's your yeast. So what you can do is you can always do that. You can always proof your yeast. Even if you have an instant yeast, you can proof it, put it in your liquid and let it sit for about 5 to 7 minutes. And if it doesn't go all nice and foamy and poofy, then your yeast is old or it's dead and it's not working. Okay. So that's how you can kind of test to make sure that your yeast is working properly. And never use expired yeast. So that's that's really important because your yeast won't work. The other thing is you should always keep your yeast in the fridge once you've opened it. That's important as well. Okay, so we've kind of just mixed this. Stuff off my spatula. There we go. And you kind of have like a shaggy mess, but see how it's pulling away from the sides of my bowl? That's what you want. If it's all sticky to the bowl, you don't want that. You just kind of want it pulling away. So I'm going to use my stand mixer. If you don't have a stand mixer, you can knead this by hand. If you have a bread machine, you can use that as well. We're going to knead it for about 6 minutes, approximately. Okay. So we're just gonna let that go. I'll keep an eye out on it, and I'm gonna show you some tips with it as well as it's going. Sorry that it's noisy. So when you're making bread and you're using flour, it really depends on what's happening with the weather as to what happens with your dough. So when it is hot and humid out, the flour actually absorbs moisture that's in the air, so you find that you might have to use less liquid. And that's why when you look at this recipe, they give you between half a cup and 2/3 of a cup of liquid. So because they're saying it's going to depend on what the weather is and what time of year you're making this. If you're making it in the winter when it's really dry and there's not a lot of moisture in the air, then you might have to use more liquid. So always start with the less amount first and then go from there. And you want to take a look at your dough once it's started mixing, because what's going to happen is it should all pull away from the sides and make a really nice ball and then kind of rotate all in the bowl. If it's not doing that and it's really, really dry, you need to add a little splash more liquid. Or vice versa, if it's really sticky and it's all sticking to the sides, then that tells you that you need a little bit more flour. And again, a lot of times it just depends on the weather. So I'm going to pull my mixer over because I want to show you what it's doing. Okay, so hopefully you guys can see this. I'm going to try and tip it. But do you see how, there. Do you see how it's pulled away? It's pulled away from the sides of the bowl. It's not sticky, it's not sticking to the bottom, and it's just kind of rotating. That's what we want. And I forgot to set my timer again. Oh my goodness. I do this every time. I even set the minutes. And so all I had to do was press start, and I forgot. Okay, so we're gonna adjust this. Let's go. There we go. So you want to knead it for about 6 to 8 minutes. So we're going to guess. And you can kind of do a finger test when you're done. And, oh, thanks, Melissa. It's been about 2 minutes. Perfect, because I put it on for 4. So we'll see where it's at. If you're kneading by hand, how you want to do it is you want to use the palm of your hand, okay? So you're going to have your baking mat, or you're going to put some flour on your counter, and you're going to take it and you're going to roll, right? So you're just going to basically take it in your hand and you're going to push, and then you're going to rotate, and you're going to push, and you're going to rotate. And what it's going to do is it's going to pick up some of that flour as you go, and it's going to incorporate it, okay? So, and I can show you that kind of when we're done. Just to kind of go back when we were talking about the yeast, yes, Heather, there are lots of rules when it comes to baking bread. I don't normally follow rules when I cook. When I bake bread, you gotta follow the rules, because otherwise it won't work, and who knows what it will turn out like. So going back to the yeast. So yeast is still, I haven't seen it in the grocery stores, but there are some different restaurants that are selling it, or other places that you can get it. So usually we always see yeast like this in the store, but if you get it from a restaurant, or like I found something similar to this at Bulk Barn. It actually comes in a package like this, and it's vacuum sealed, okay? And it's 1 pound. So all you do, and it looks kind of weird, and I was kind of like, really? Like, that's my little jar of yeast? Yes, it is. So all you're going to do is you're going to open it, pour it into a sealable container, take as much air out of this as possible, okay? Clip it. Gotta love Twix-A-Clips. Clip it. Get all the air out of it like that. And again, store this in your fridge until you need to refill your jar of yeast, okay? Okay, what else can I tell you? Does anybody have any questions while we just finish kneading this? kind of wait and see if anybody's got any. But if you are using, so I've never used a bread machine, but with this recipe, if you are using a bread machine, there is instructions in the recipe for you in order to mix it and then also to let it rise, okay? So I'll bring this over and I'm going to show you because we got about a minute left. So take a look, see how that's going around, and there's basically nothing left on the side of my bowl. There's no flour, there's no stickiness, there's no nothing. So that is like, that's good dough today. Sometimes my dough doesn't do that. And I have to adjust it with a little more flour or a little more water. Okay, so if you haven't watched my bread tutorials before, one of my favorite things to use is a shower cap, okay? I don't put it on my head. I use this to cover my bowl as my bread's rising. So, because it locks in all of the moisture and the heat that's in there, and so it just, you get a really beautiful rise. So instead of using saran wrap and having to throw it out every time, so it's quiet. So instead of having to use saran wrap and throw it out every time that you're baking, go to the dollar store, buy a package of shower caps, keep them in your drawer, and they'll last you pretty well forever, okay? And use these for when you're proofing your bread. So we're all done. And there is my ball of dough. So do you see how it's not sticky at all? And I get a nice little bounce when I push on it. That's what you want. Okay, so that's the consistency that you want your dough to be. And just to show you guys really quickly, if you can see here, just move this out of the way. If you are kneading by hand, the easiest way to knead by hand is you have your dough. You're gonna take the palm of your hand and you're gonna push out, and then you're going to bring back, and then you're gonna push. Okay, so it's this kind of motion. Turn, push, turn, push, turn, push. And you're gonna do that for about 6 to 8 minutes, okay? And that's gonna knead your dough. So we have our lovely little ball of dough. So you're gonna take your mixing bowl. I don't like to dirty another bowl. This one's already dirty, so I'm gonna reuse it. And you're gonna grease it. So take your spritzer, or if you don't have a spritzer, put a little bit of oil on your hand and rub the inside of your bowl. Don't use Pam, okay? Don't use that stuff. So just use a little bit of oil. So take your spritzer, spritz on the inside, just like that. Make sure you always release the air out of your spritzer. Otherwise, your spritzer will sit like that in your cupboard and it won't last you as long, okay? So make sure you take the air out of it. And then you're gonna put your ball, of dough in there, and we're gonna take our shower cap, like that. And then we're gonna let this little guy sit, and we're gonna let it do its thing, okay? So you're gonna let it sit, and the rise time is roughly an hour to an hour and a half. Again, it depends on how hot your house is. If your house is really cool, it's gonna take a little bit longer. If your house is really warm, it's gonna take less time. So how I like to do this, give me 1 second, I just have to check, there was a question here. Okay. Oh, Heather asked, can you over knead the dough? Yeah, you can actually. So just try and go with the recommendation in the recipe as to how long it kneads for, because every dough recipe has a different knead time. Some are 2 minutes, some are 4, some are 6 to 8. Honestly, I don't know the ins and outs enough of baking to know why, based on the type of dough that you're making, but I know that you can over knead it. So getting back to proofing your dough. So what I like to do to make kind of giving it my dough a little happy environment is I like to proof it in my oven, because that is a confined space that is a consistent temperature. So what I normally do, and I especially do this in the winter time, is I put my oven on to 350 and I set my timer, and I remember to turn it on. I set my timer for 1 minute. And then when my 1 minute is up, I turn my oven off, okay? Don't leave your oven on. Bad things will happen. Don't leave your oven on. So I put my oven on for 1 minute and I turn it off, because that is just enough of a little smidge of heat to retain in that environment that I find that I get a beautiful rise on my dough, and it proofs lovely and it doesn't take near as long. Okay, so that is what I do. So I'm going to proof this. What time is it? We're 20 after. So let's plan on meeting back. We'll kind of divide the time. We'll meet back in an hour and a half. So let's plan for 10:45. I will meet you guys back here. I will show you how the bread has risen, and then we will shape it, put it into our loaf pan, and then we do one more rise, and then it will go into the oven. Okay, so I will meet you guys back here at 10:45. Just once again, that's what our dough looks like, and wait until you see what this looks like in an hour and a half. So hope you're having a fantastic morning. Thank you for joining me, and I will see you guys back here at 10:45. Cheers. From shaking. Okay. Hey guys. Okay. So we have part 2 of our sandwich bread making. So we let our dough proof. I proofed it for about an hour and a half. I did it with my oven trick that I told you guys about. I like to do it in a metal bowl. I find it holds in the heat of my dough with my lovely little shower cap. And check that out. Isn't that pretty? It's so nice. And you can actually feel the warmth, okay? So what we want to do is we want to do something called deflating. So when you read a recipe and you deflate the dough, how you do it, because there's lots of air pockets in there right now. Basically, you take your fist and you just push it down, okay? So all you're doing is you're just taking the air out of it. You're not pounding it. You're just basically deflating it like that. And we're going to take it out of our bowl. Okay, see how nice that comes right out. And we've got our ball. We don't want to overwork it. Really, all I want to do is kind of shape it into a log that's about 8 inches. Okay, thereabouts. And then we're going to put it into the loaf pan. You can grease it a little bit. I like to take a little bit of butter and just kind of put it all around. I like using butter just because I find it kind of transfers to the crust and you get a really nice tasting crust. Okay. So there we go. See how I have that? It's just kind of a nice little log. Okay, and I'm going to pop that into my loaf pan. Just like that. Okay, doesn't need to be pretty. So, and we're gonna take our handy dandy little shower cap again, and we're gonna cover it. And I like to make sure that it's pulled up like this, because what we want to do is we're gonna let this proof again. And we're going to let it proof for about an hour, and we want it to be a good inch above the top of the loaf pan. Okay, so after about 45 minutes, preheat your oven. No sense in doing it right now and wasting the electricity. So preheat your oven at about the 45-minute mark-ish, and you're going to do that at 350. And then by the time your oven's preheated, this should be ready to go. As I said, you know it's ready when you're at about an inch above. The recipe also says if you press your finger into the dough, it should leave a mark and then it should rebound slowly. So that's when you know that your bread is all ready to go. And then you're going to pop it in the oven for about 30 to 35 minutes until it's nice and golden brown. I like to pull it out. One thing that I have found is because I've made a few sandwich breads lately, and what I find is that when I take it out of the oven, the top of it, I can tap it and it's hard. And then as it cools, the top goes soft. That's supposed to be like that, because if you buy sandwich, Wonder Bread from the grocery store, the top of it, it's not an artisan bread. The top of it is soft. So don't worry if that happens. That's supposed to happen with this type of bread. The other tip that I have found is I have let it cool in the loaf pan, and then when I take it out, my crust around the bottom is a little soggy, because what happens is as you guys know, stoneware retains heat. So it's keeping that heat in there, and then it's causing moisture. So that's why that happens, and it can go a little soggy around the bottom of your crust. So let it cool in the loaf pan, maybe for about 5-10 minutes, and then take it out of the loaf pan and cool it on your cooling rack. And then you'll avoid any problems with that. But you should get an absolute beautiful rise. If it hasn't risen as much as you would like, or it hasn't risen above an inch above the top of the loaf pan, then that's okay. Just let it rise a little bit longer. That happened to me the first time. The house was cool. So I just let it rise. Longer, and then I baked it. So if that happens, don't panic. Just let it rise a little bit longer before you go ahead and bake. So looking forward to seeing your photos. As always, would love for you to share them. I will post a picture of this once I pull it out of the oven for you. And as always, thank you so much for supporting my small business, and for being the fantastic customers and hosts that you guys are. Please know how much it's appreciated. And if I can be of any service or any help for you, don't hesitate to reach out. Or if there's something that you want to learn, I'm happy to help. I might not know how to make it, and I'll let you know. But if it is something, then certainly I'd be happy to help. So have a fantastic day, and thanks again, guys. And I will post pictures when we're done, and don't forget to post your photos too. Okay? Take care. Cheers.